I think that this book has probably been the single most helpful information to come out to humanize Charles. And he's a complicated man who also cares a lot about his son, who's been there for his son, who has loved his son, who has been loved back by his son, who is interesting, who is funny, who can be charismatic. And again, this is from an American lens. I don't, they cover that family way more in Britain, and I'm sure they have a whole different version of who Charles is. But for us, he's kind of always been overshadowed by who Diana was, even posthumously. So even if he also acknowledges that his father is all the negative things that any human being could be, I think that this book has probably been the single most helpful information to come out to humanize Charles and make the reader be sympathetic towards him in a way that we never have before and we never even thought that we would be. Like, I came out of this story actually liking him a little bit. Now, is he stiff and does he not know how to, hug his kids and tell him he loves them and love openly the way their mom did? Yes. But how many of our fathers have been like that? It's part of the patriarchy. It's not just the monarchy, it's also the patriarchy, and it is complicated. But in so many other ways, he shows that he has a relationship where he has trusted his father and gone to him and talked to him. And it hasn't always worked out the way that he wanted, but there's still a love there. The other thing that the book does really well is remind you again that all of these characters, all of these people, all these lives exist outside of that relationship to the thing, right? Because the thing is the Diana, Charles, difficult years, the Queen's relationship with Diana, Diana being murdered by the paparazzi, and everybody's title has really come from that. Charles, Diana's ex-husband, the Queen, her ex-mother-in-law, her poor children who grew up without a mother. Like, everybody I feel like was positioned based off of this one unalterable, giant, overarching event that kind of colors everything. But Harry and his ghostwriter bring it back to he was a young kid who lost his mom, and he was not given the proper resources to deal with that loss, and he has struggled with his mourning for her throughout his entire life, and he was picked apart as a person from a really young age. He was given labels and treated like you would treat, a 30-year-old celebrity when he was 15, like wild Harry out here in the streets, getting himself in trouble again, messing up in school, like all these things that kids are just normally allowed to do or be or experience as part of being a kid. It was blasted over in Britain as big news. And it created this perception that again, he is like this character, this part in a larger play, because why else would you care that this guy was getting C's in school? I don't know, whatever, I'm making something up. Like, why would you care if it was not the fact that, oh, he is Diana's son who doesn't have a mom, and poor thing, he's doing bad in school. Whereas not thinking of him like he's just a regular kid who's having a hard time. Why are we even talking about this? Leave him alone. Now, there are going to be people who feel like there is no leave him alone. He is a prince. He's a public figure. He lives off of the horrendous things that the monarchy has been doing for time immemorial. We don't feel bad for him. If you think like that, this is not the video for you, FYI. You're entitled to that opinion. You can feel however you want about it. That's not how I feel about it. So we're going to talk about Prince Harry over here like he's actually a person. So that's the other part that was surprising, and it shouldn't have been, from that story, is that you really get to meet, I think, you really get to meet Prince Harry for the first time. And he talks about how much he loves his country. He takes you through him being a young soldier, and he ends up being such a complex man by the end of it, where he is a mourning child without a mother. He is a young man that would have liked his family to have been, or that he noticed that his family wasn't as as affectionate as maybe his mom had been with him growing up. You know, he notes that he had a great relationship with the queen. He loves her so much. She's laughed the most with him. William has said that, you know, he gets away with more, that Harry gets away with more because he's one of the queen's favorites. But at the same time, he says that he's never been hugged by the queen. And it's like, oh, you know, not being hugged by the queen, I guess would sound normal, but like that's his grandmother. So it's a little strange. And then you're at the same time seeing how much he respects and admires his grandmother as the head of the state, and how much serving her and serving his country matters to him. And it's just so much more complex than you had thought before. You thought he's just, you know, wild prince that you kind of like a lot. That's more interesting, honestly, than his brother. And maybe that's because he's allowed to be, because he is the spare and he can go out there and live a more normal life than William was probably allowed to. We don't know that side of the story, but he's been beloved in general. But again, he was kind of a one-dimensional figure, and he used this story really well, and his ghostwriter got this story out of him really well to open him up and show you that he is much more complex than he seems to be, while at the same time also showing you that he is a super simple guy who likes to hang out with his friends, get drunk, be ridiculous, and, you know, go fight the bad guys, bang bang, shoot 'em up, not too complicated kind of person, which he's also allowed to be that too. So on that same theme, the surprises from Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing are also there, and they're really more around things that you didn't know about Matthew Perry outside of The Biggest Thing, which I think we've all kind of known that he struggled with substance abuse over the years, and outside of his arc in Friends, that he has obviously had more things about him outside of that, even though those two things take up a majority of the book. And in fact, his struggle with sobriety is the main theme through the entire book, bar none. So Matthew Perry has done interviews before, but again, I feel like that whole cast has really made a concerted attempt at as much privacy as they possibly can. At different times in their lives, I'm guessing that has been more challenging than others. For instance, Jennifer Aniston and the whole Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt thing. But for the most part, they really have been a closed-lipped type of group. And I will say this for Matthew Perry's autobiography, while he talks about kind of getting friends and the development and them becoming successful and their relationship to him with his struggles with sobriety, at no point in time does he make any sort of commentary about any of their personal lives. It seems like he's respecting the fact that they have all chosen to be these more low-key types of figures, and I personally applaud him for that. The other positive surprise is, again, finding out a bit more about who Matthew Perry is. Apparently, his dad was the Old Spice man. I did not know that. His mother was President Trudeau's press secretary. Also did not know that. So he had connections to kind of public life way before he ever became Chandler Bing. And he also gives you a little bit of background into young Hollywood at the time that you don't usually hear stories of outside of some key larger figures that a lot of people tell stories about. The River Phoenix, the Brad Pitt, the Emilio Estevez, the just kind of really Robert Downey Jr. pop culturally significant people. And Matthew Perry does talk about River Phoenix because he was in a movie with him, and so he has a short part where he laments his death, and he said he was one of the best people he's ever known. Super sweet guy. But he also talks to you about Hank Azria, which I have always loved. I think he's an amazing character actor. Obviously, he's a lot of voices on The Simpsons. He's had a really successful career as a voice actor. And we all know him from his Friends stint as Phoebe's boyfriend. In a few episodes, originally he's David the Scientist, and then he comes back in that same guise for a few episodes in her plot with Mike and ending up with him. And he's a great character actor. But for me personally, his time on Birdcage was my favorite. He's the best housekeeper ever. He looks great in cut off shorts. He is hilarious. Also, you don't think of Craig Bierko, who For me, he's also been in and out of different things that I've seen, but as with a lot of people, I'm going to guess my favorite of his turns is when he is the sexy jazz club owner. Carrie likes jazz. Carrie likes jazz. From his couple episode arc in Sex and the City. So it's interesting to see that they were a group of friends and he had these relationships with them and they were all auditioning for all of the same things. And I think everybody always likes that whole idea of like, oh, what if it had been this person, or if it had just been this other person, would it have turned out the way that it did? All the what ifs, I feel like in Hollywood are always so interesting. There's always interviews with somebody where they'll say, yeah, I interviewed for Michael Keaton's Batman and then I turned it down. And you're like, dude, you were not gonna be that Batman. There's only one Batman. That would have been horrendous, but everything happens for a reason. It's just still interesting to hear those things. Like I turned down The Matrix. I forgot who the famous one. It was like I turned down The Matrix, and it was like, thank God, because only Keanu could have done it the way he did. And I'm inserting that purposely because Matthew Perry gave Keanu a little bit of I guess, flack. Nothing specific. He just said, you know, we've lost some great actors, and somehow Keanu Reeves is still walking around here. I think it's like just a Chandler-ish type funny dig, and I believe he's since apologized for it. But we've all kind of, you know, made Keanu Reeves to be that kind of dude that's just kind of stumbled into things, I guess. So it's an easy dig. He gives you some of the, I guess, behind the scenes-ish information on Friends that I think we were looking for in the reunion special, and you didn't get as much of a sense of how it really was for the cast. I feel like they've gotten so used to being careful with what they say, or they've gotten so used to being private that it still always feels like a surface look into their time together, whereas Matthew Perry lifts the veil a little bit. It's nothing sensational, but he talks about how creative they were together, how everybody was able to submit jokes or line changes if they thought that it would help a scene. And a lot of times it got chosen. He said, you know, if you were the craft service person and you had a good joke, we're throwing that in there. So I think that helped a lot with the feeling of those characters being so authentic and you really feeling like they embodied the personalities of those characters so amazingly well. He talks a lot about how Chandler was him, and he got to write a lot of jokes for Chandler. He got to write jokes for other people, and he's just clearly an overall really funny guy, which you knew, but it's nice to know that you did get to know some of him and some of the other characters through the fact of them being so directly involved in who those characters became. Now, those were some of the surprise yeses. You know, it's a little funny that Matthew Perry is kind of a Nepo baby before Nepo babies became a thing. Can you be a Nepo baby if your dad's the Old Spice man? I don't know. Feels significant. Might not have been as much back then, but there were surprise no's, and I'll start with Spare because that's where we've been going. So with Spare, we're pointing over here. We're gonna put Spare over here. With Spare, the surprise no's, I would say, were really around who Prince William is, at least in his relationship to Harry. I think that a lot of it is like older brother stuff or older sibling stuff. You don't necessarily want your younger sibling to be hanging around all the time, bothering you. You get mad at them. You're usually more serious than they are. You usually feel like they don't have as many consequences as you. You usually resent the fact that they have more freedom, or they're allowed to be less responsible versions of who you were allowed to be. I think that describes so many older sibling, younger sibling relationships, and there's nothing particularly sensational about that until and unless your older sibling is going to be the monarch of a country one day and is your, you know, in essence, commander-in-chief and can legally tell you you cannot do X, Y, or Z. And you saw a little of that in The Crown with Queen Elizabeth and her relationship with her younger sister, and how that kind of natural older sibling, younger sibling dynamic can be really poisoned by the fact that the older sibling has so much power. Whereas in regular life, if your older sibling is complaining about something that you're doing, you know, oh well, Bob, you know, like it or lump it, this is who I am, but they get to force you to be somebody else, and even though William isn't the monarch today, he is going to be, and that kind of obviously, besides the fact that he named it Spare, so he's pointing at his relationship to that position, but also just by virtue of where he's positioned in his life, you can feel that it is a thing. It's a thing that becomes a presence. It wasn't so much a presence when they were younger. And it's this kind of story into how they changed positionally and how it really could become a dangerous position. And I would argue almost has a lot to do, outside of the actual paparazzi, it has a lot to do with why they needed to leave, why Meghan and Harry needed to leave. So basically, like, the long and the short of that, and it being a no, is that of it being a surprise no, is that I kind of didn't want to know that. I didn't want to know that about William. I felt like him and Kate and Harry and Meghan were just kind of like the next chapter for Britain. Obviously, Charles is king now that Elizabeth is dead, but he's 4,000 years old too. He's also a complicated figure publicly because of Diana, because of Camilla, because of, like, why are we still supporting these old people? This is an old system. It just brings up a lot of negative connotations that it felt like William and Kate were going to be able to wipe out. And it might be why the family obviously is so upset with Harry for having written this, because maybe other people felt that way too. And now something feels broken, tarnished. It's important that it was talked about, but it's like one of those things of you didn't want to know. The other surprise no I feel like about Spare is I wanted to know all about paparazzi, the tabloids, the part that they played. I wanted to get that information about the background, and I want something done about them. Absolutely. But I didn't know how long and how much of Harry's life has been consumed by this thing, and I can't imagine living it, so I don't want to be too judgmental, but at the same time, I want him to start a new chapter, like scrub it clean, move on. They're the bad guy. They're always going to be the bad guy. You are never going to win. Like, the obsessive part of it where they're like they're like in a ship with 5,000 holes, and they're trying to like plug every hole with gum. Like, just get out of the fucking boat. Just get out of the boat. Like, there's no changing it. And the continuous struggle against it, just it's obviously consuming, and it's consumed him, and he has found somebody who's willing to live under that type of scrutiny with him, even though he's lost other people who weren't. And at this point, it's just like, close the door, end the chapter, let's start a new story. The surprise no from Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing is how much I ended up disliking Matthew Perry at the end of that book. I said that out loud, and it is my truth. I love the character Chandler Bing. I think the whole world does. Perry does a great job of telling you that Chandler is all of the things that he struggles with insecurity-wise, with women, with life, with not feeling good enough, and making him lovable at that same time. Obviously, his relationship with Monica helps that, but overall, he is made into this character that is always redemptive. And Matthew Perry, like a lot of human beings with insecurities, has been on he has been a bad guy to people in his life, and he owns it. He has been a bad guy to women, and he owns it. He has taken his family hostage through his issues with sobriety, and he owns it. That's really not why I struggle with liking him by the end. It is really more because while he admits to knowing that he was a bad actor, not a bad actor, but a bad actor in certain parts of his life with people in his life, at the same time, there's a lot of but, and it does not feel like he's really resolved all of his feelings around owning who he's been. Like, by the end of it, he's in a phase in life where he's visiting over and over again how now because of his struggles, because of his challenges in life, because of his usage of different drugs that have chemically altered what would be considered his normal emotional responses. He has damaged a lot of relationships with women in his life because of his fears of being left and his insecurities. He's damaged a lot of relationships with women in his life. And so he doesn't have a family. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have kids to come home to. He's in this beautiful life in this beautiful house, and he's all alone. And it's sad, and you feel sad for him. But at the same time, while he's visiting that line of thought, he's also continuously saying, within that framework where I've lost so much or I've thrown away so much, I'm still finding things that bring me joy. In particular, his work with addicts brings him a lot of joy, and the fact that he's been able to touch who knows how many lives through friends, through his relationship with AA, through his ability to mentor people and go to retreats and inspire people. And still he's saying, and this is all through a narrative where he's talking about how much he has, and I think in an ironic way, like, again, look at me, this mess in pieces, and in my sports car that I drove through somebody's house, you know, my ridiculously expensive sports car that I drove through somebody's house, in a $40 million house, and all that. He's painting this picture and saying, you know, and he's trying to build this redemptive arc but I can help these people, and my life is still meaningful, and I'm finding meaning in it. But at the same time, I'm still asking God, like, there must be more. Like, I'm still alive. I have this wreckage I've caused, and I'm still alive, and it's gotta be because there is some higher purpose. I know it, and I believe in God, and that it's going to be revealed to me at some time. And you're just like, what?